Hey, this is Martin Brennand from Imagineer Systems, and today we're going to be looking at the new Mocha HitFilm that's available inside HitFilm 2 Ultimate. So inside HitFilm 2 Ultimate, we have a new option to camera solve with Mocha HitFilm. So this is a limited version of the Mocha software that works exclusively with HitFilm to bring camera data back into HitFilm. So what we're going to do is track this scene here and then define a camera for it so we can insert some 3D models. But this can be used for anything, for your 3D models or your 3D effects or whatever you need to do. So we're going to start off by clicking the camera solve for Mocha HitFilm, and we'll load up Mocha HitFilm and do some tracking. Okay, so with Mocha HitFilm selected, I'm just going to create a new project. I'm going to choose my file, and we'll just check if our settings are correct, which they look like they are. So I'm going to click OK, overwrite that one. And so that brings the footage into our software. So the way Mocha works is that we use a planar tracker to track areas of texture within the scene, and then we use that data to solve a camera to bring back into HitFilm. So for pan tilt zoom shots, we need to just track one plane because we've got a locked camera that just needs to work out the camera pane. And then we have parallax cameras which require at least two planes to help define the depth and motion of the scene. So in this case we've got sort of a fairly large parallax shot going on here, so we're going to have to track at least two planes within our shot to get a good result. Now a plane is pretty much defined as anything that could be described as planar. So this ground is obviously planar, this skyline is obviously planar because we're not getting any parallax in the background here, so we've got a good track. If I scrub back to the beginning here, these buildings have good planar data on them. Even this wall to some degree has, but we don't have a lot of information to work with here. And if we look at the lady in the foreground, we could probably get a bit of planar data off her bag. Even though it's not directly planar, we can kind of fool the tracker into thinking that something is planar. So in this case, what we want to do is insert a model onto the ground here. So I'm going to track the ground first to get some information off that. So the way we do a planar track is that we draw a shape. I'm going to use an X-spline, or you can use a Bezier spline over here. So we just simply draw a shape straight down onto our ground, and then we can view what our track is going to look like by turning on the grid and surface. So I'll turn on the surface first, and it brings up this blue surface grid. And I'll turn on the grid as well, so we can get some more information. And we just manipulate the surface around to sort of line it up with the perspective of that ground. Now, it's not absolutely necessary to do it at this stage, but it just gives you a better idea while you're tracking. So I'll set it about there. I'm now going to set the motion parameters. So under the motion parameters, I'm going to set this to perspective because we've got quite a bit of movement going on around the scene. I'm also going to adjust my minimum percentage of pixels used to about 90%. The larger this value is, it will take longer to do, but the smaller the value it is, it will be quicker but less accurate. Under the input channel, we've kept it at luminance, and luminance just basically means convert the footage to grayscale and then try and work out the texture detail from that. The auto channel will try and pick a channel from either red, green or blue and try and work out if there's enough texture detail in one of those channels. But in this case, we've probably got enough for luminance. So with those set, I'm going to start tracking. Now, as I go through, you're going to notice that I've started right here in the middle of the timeline. This isn't necessary. You can start anywhere along the timeline that you like and then just track backwards and forwards. Here though, because she is going to get in the way of my track, I will have to animate part of my shape, which is completely acceptable when you're tracking inside Mocha. So I'm going to go back to that original drawn keyframe and start tracking forwards. So you can see here, as she starts to come over the top of this background, I'm going to get a problem. So I can stop the track at any point and just move my shape around. This will create an animated shape, but it won't affect the tracking data underneath, because this shape here is simply a search area for the tracker to look at. So I can keep on tracking. And now her arm is going to avoid that shape because I've animated it out of the way, and we can continue tracking without a problem. So as soon as she starts to get close to this again, I could move the shape again, or I could draw a mask around her in the foreground to block her out, and we'll do that next for the background. So here she's starting to get a little bit close, so I'm going to stop there and just move the shape over a little bit more. So with that part tracked, we can just scrub back and forth between this section. So you can see how that shape is animating, but my tracking data is remaining locked down quite nicely. I'm going to go ahead now and track the rest of this shot and just stop the recording for a second so that you don't have to watch it, but we're just going to track backwards and adjust the shape if she gets in the way. Okay, now we have this shape. We can see how that's locked on quite nicely. We've tracked all the way through the shot, and we can see how this surface is pinning down quite well. And you can see how my shape is animating where I've moved it out of the way of her, but it's not affecting the tracking data. So now that we have this plane tracked, we actually need to track another plane to help really define the 3D space for the camera solver. The reason we have to do this is because we only really have one plane to work with, so the camera solver at the moment doesn't really know how the camera is moving through the scene. If this was just a pan-tilt zoom shot, it would be easy to actually just track one plane, because we know that the camera is locked to one position and is only rotating or tilting in space. So to do this, I want to track the skyline in the background. I could track the wall here, but there isn't really enough information. It's very important when you're doing a parallax shot like this that you have to grab a plane that is not planar to the track you've already done. By this we mean, like, I couldn't just track another plane over here because that wouldn't give me enough dimensional information for the camera solver to work with. So we're going to work with this skyline here, and I really want to get rid of her out of the shot so that she's not interfering with my track. So what I'm going to do first is actually track her out of the way so I can mask her out of the shot when I'm tracking the background. So first of all, I'm just going to name my previous layer that I've tracked. I'm going to call it ground, and I'm going to turn off its tracking cog so I don't track it anymore, and we'll just turn it off so I can't see it. So now what I'm going to do is just draw a very rough shape around the lady. And this is going to be my mask information for the girl in the foreground. Now we don't need to worry too much about this being tight because we're literally just using it as a garbage mask. So I'm going to just turn off shear and rotation because I only really care about tracking translation and scale of how she's moving in and out of the scene. And I'm going to start tracking this backwards. Now because the girl is not a planar shape, we're going to be moving and manipulating this shape as we go. So you can already see here that her shoulder is starting to come out of this mask shape. And to help that, I'm going to turn on the mats for the selected shape so I can see what I'm doing. And I'll just keep on tracking backwards. Now we could actually animate this shape manually. We don't have to track it, but the tracking just helps get all the subtle movement that's happening with the girl so that I don't have to do as many keyframes while I'm working. So we can see here that it's sort of starting to get a bit small on this side, so I can stop again, and we can use the transform tool around the shape, which is this box here, and just scale that in a little bit. And we can just keep on tracking. So I'm going to go ahead and finish rotoing out this shape, just worrying about what's clearing above the skyline, and we'll come back when we're done. Okay, so that mask is finished now, and we can see, as I said, it's a very rough shape. It's just literally to hold out the top of her body so that she doesn't interfere with the skyline. So I'm now going to draw the background shape for the skyline so we can track that. So first of all, I'm going to name this one just foreground mask. And let's just make it a little bit of a different color so that we can see the difference. And I'm going to lock this mask down and turn off its tracking information. I'm then going to now draw another shape around here. So I'm going to draw a shape that avoids these foreground poles. And probably this bush as well, actually, because it's going to be quite a bit of parallax going on there. So I'm just trying to get the background information, but avoiding these fence poles in the foreground. And we might just move those up just a little bit so we miss them out. We could also mask out these poles, but they're probably not going to interfere too much. I just want to make sure that I avoid this foreground area completely so we don't get any weird tracking when we track. So I've got that shape there, And we're going to turn the grid on so we can see what we're doing, but we're also going to move our layer below the foreground mask. So I'm just going to call this one Skyline. And we can probably make this a bit bigger actually. I'm going to move this just over to here. And we're going to move the skyline below the foreground mask because everything that's at the top of our stack is closest to the camera, and everything that's at the bottom of the stack is further away. Now, if we were being sort of very particular about it, I would put the skyline at the very, very bottom, because that means the skyline is the furthest away object. So it's nice to structure your layers in this way so that you know where they are. So now when I actually look at my track mats and select skyline, if I just scrub through this shot quickly, you can see how she's eating into this skyline mask. This means that when we actually start tracking this, she won't interfere with that tracking area. So again, I'm going to turn on perspective, and we've already got 90 set there for this skyline. So I'm going to start tracking, and we'll come back when we're done. Okay, so now we have that shape. We can see that's tracking through. And so we can now use this in combination with our other shape. So I'm going to turn back on my ground. And so we now have the ground plane, and we have a skyline plane that we can use to help solve our track. So I'm going to select the ground plane, and I'm going to select the sky plane, and I'm going to go over to the camera solver. Now in camera solver, we can choose auto to let Mocha work out what the type of camera solve is. But if we know what the type it is, it's usually better to actually choose it. So a pan tilt zoom is obviously when you want a locked off camera with only pan tilt and zoom. Small parallax is when there's a subtle level of movement in the scene, and large parallax is where there's quite a large movement going on. So in this case I'm going to select this because we've got this quite sweeping move around the character. And I'm going to turn on zooming because there's just a little bit of zooming going on there. And then we can click solve. So this will now go through with the large parallax solver just churning through that shot. If we'd selected auto, it would have taken a little bit longer just to go through and guess the type of solve that it actually is. But in this case, because we know it's a large parallax solver, we can use this one. So we get a solve here of 97%, which is a very good solve. Pretty much anything above 80 is a very good solve. If you start to get below that, you probably want to try some new planes or add additional planes to help your solve. With large parallax and small parallax, you want at least 2 planes, but 3 can also help if you've got more information. We don't have enough information here, we've only really got the sky and the ground, so that's all we're going to use for this shot. So once we get our camera solve, we can literally just export our camera data. So I'm going to go to HitFilm Composite Shot and choose Save. And I'm just going to select Rooftop Demo, which is the one I wrote out before, and click Yes. And then we can go back to HitFilm. Okay, so back in HitFilm, I'm just going to come up to Import and choose Composite Shot. I can then load in my shot that I exported out of Mocha. And this will bring in our composite shot that is created by Mocha. So we've got our original media file, and then a camera that's generated inside Mocha, and we get 5 nulls for each surface that we created. So you can see here on the ground, which I've selected, that I get a null for each corner of that surface that I laid down inside Mocha, and then a center null that is right in the middle of that surface. And the same goes for the sky. If we look at the sky nulls, they're sitting about on that plane. Now your orientation of your nulls is not going to be always correct because Mocha's trying to do its best to guess which way the plane was facing. But in this case it looks like the ground is looking pretty okay, except obviously the orientation is pointing down. So we can use this now to start inserting a model into our shot. So to insert a model, I'm just going to go to Import 3D Model, and I'm going to bring in this phone box. And I'm just going to click Create. And then I can drag this into my composite shot. And it'll just dump right in the middle of our scene here. So we want to move it over to that ground area. So I'm just going to load up the world transform. And let's just drag this up a little bit so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to find the center of this ground and pull up its transform. So in this case, I'm going to copy the position of that from the null of the ground center and paste it to the model position. Now you can see here it's a bit big, so I'm just going to scale this down to about there. Now it's quite over here, so I'm just going to move my scene over a little bit. And we can also see that our anchor point is right in the middle of this model here. So I'm just going to move that down with the Y tool. And I'm also going to grab the rotation of the ground null, and we're going to copy that. And I'm going to paste that to the rotation of the model as well. Now obviously the rotation transform is slightly different, so we're going to have to move that around. So I'm just going to come around here, and we can grab our handle here and just move that up correctly. So we can just tweak that a little bit to make sure we're looking in the right spot, and I'm just going to rotate around that so we can see the doorway here. So once we have that in spot, I'm just going to turn off my floor. The floor plane is not always going to be sitting correctly in the shot because the camera solver is working it out purely from the planes. We don't define a specific floor plane, so if you want that to be exactly accurate, you'll have to rotate your camera around. But for this part, we're just going to turn that floor plane off. I'm then just going to quickly turn on the ambient occlusion for this phone box, just so that sits a little better. And we can start inserting lights and things into the scene, but we get the idea. So if I just start playing this back now, we can see how that model is now locked down to the ground plane where we defined it inside Mocha and tracked it through. So that's a quick overview of how you get the Mocha HitFilm data into HitFilm by using the camera solver. You have to at least define 2 planes within your shot for a moving shot like this, or 1 plane if you're doing a pan-tilt zoom shot. You can then set up your 3D object in the shot using the nulls that are created by Mocha when we export out to HitFilm. If you'd like to know more about the planar tracking and the 3D camera solving inside Mocha, you can go check out the website at imagineersystems.com, where we have a lot of different tutorials on both the 2D tracking methods and the 3D camera solving. If you have any questions, you can ask on the forum at forum.imagineersystems.com, or you can check out Facebook at facebook.com/imagineersystems.